People don't fail because they lack opportunity. They fail because they become comfortable being average. And average is the most dangerous place you can live. Because it doesn't hurt enough to force change, but it never rewards you enough to feel fulfilled. So you stay, you scroll, you delay, you tell yourself soon, and slowly your life becomes a loop. Wake up, repeat, distract, sleep. No fire, no urgency, no growth, just survival dressed up as stability. But here's the truth most people will never say out loud. Average is not safe. Average is where dreams go to die quietly. In this audiobook, Stop Living Like Everyone Else, you're going to confront the mindset that keeps you stuck, the invisible patterns that make you settle, and the uncomfortable truth about why you're not where you want to be. You'll discover why average thinking feels comfortable but costs you everything. How your daily habits silently lock you into mediocrity. The mindset shift that separates those who escape from those who stay stuck forever. And the discipline required to rebuild yourself from the inside out. This is not motivation for entertainment. This is a reset. And one thing you need to understand before we go any further. This is not financial advice. This is not a shortcut. This is reality. Because money, success, freedom, they don't come from wishing. They come from thinking differently and acting accordingly. Here's the punchline you need to hear early. You don't get stuck because life is hard. You stay stuck because average feels easier than change. Let that sit with you. Because everything you're about to hear will challenge the way you've been living. And if you're still here, it means part of you already knows the truth. You're capable of more. You just haven't demanded it from yourself yet. So, before we begin, make a quiet decision. Not loud, not emotional, just clear that you're done being average. If that resonates with you, this is your moment. Because Chapter 1 is where everything starts to shift, and it begins with something most people avoid their entire lives. Chapter 1, the lie of I'm doing fine. There's a sentence that ruins more lives than failure ever could. I'm doing fine, not great, not terrible, just fine. And that's the problem, because fine doesn't push you. Fine doesn't demand growth. Fine gives you just enough comfort to stay exactly where you are. Think about it. You're not starving. You're not completely lost. You're not at rock bottom, so your brain tells you, relax. It's okay. But deep down, there's something else. A quiet voice, a tension, a feeling that you're capable of more, but you're not living it. That feeling, that's awareness. And most people silence it. They distract it with entertainment. They bury it under routines. They ignore it with excuses. Because facing it means admitting something uncomfortable. You're settling. Not because you have to, but because you've accepted less than what you could become. And once you accept that, everything changes. Because now it's not about circumstances. It's about standards. The truth is, your life is not built on what you want. It's built on what you tolerate. And if you tolerate average, you will live an average life, not because you're incapable, but because you allowed it. There are people right now, same age, same background, same starting point, but they made one different decision. They refused to stay fine. They demanded more from themselves, not someday, now. And that decision, it compounds. Because every day you accept average, you reinforce it. Every day you delay action, you normalize it. Every day you say, I'll start later. You train your mind to stay where it is. This is how people lose years. Not through failure, but through comfort. And the scariest part? It feels normal. That's why this is dangerous, because nothing dramatic happens. No alarm goes off. No warning appears, just slow, quiet, stagnation, until one day you wake up and realize you're still in the same place you were years ago. Same habits, same mindset, same results, different time. That's the cost of average. It doesn't destroy you instantly, it erodes you slowly. And if you don't interrupt it, it becomes your identity. So here's the question you need to answer honestly. Are you actually doing fine? Or have you just gotten used to less? Because those are two very different realities. And your answer determines everything that comes next. Dear friend, we are just starting to work on this channel, so your likes and subscriptions will greatly help us grow. Don't be indifferent. Thank you. Chapter 2. Why most people stay stuck forever. You might think people stay stuck because they don't know what to do. That's not true. Most people know exactly what they should be doing. Wake up earlier, work on themselves, save money, build skills, stay consistent. They know. So why don't they do it? Because knowledge doesn't change behavior. Identity does. And most people have built an identity around being average. They don't say it out loud, but their actions reveal it. They avoid discomfort. They choose easy over necessary. They prioritize short-term relief over long-term growth. And over time, that becomes who they are. Not because they decided it consciously, but because they repeated it daily. You don't become average overnight. You become average through repetition. Small choices, repeated daily until they feel permanent. That's why change feels hard. Because you're not just changing actions, you're breaking identity. And identity fights back. It whispers things like, "This is too much. You'll start tomorrow. You deserve a break." It's not that serious. And if you listen, you stay exactly where you are. This is what the competitor transcript hinted at when it exposed how people ignore basic reality and logic in their decisions, not because they're incapable, but because they avoid facing the truth. And the truth is simple. If your habits don't change, your life won't change, no matter how much you think about it, no matter how many videos you watch, no matter how motivated you feel in the moment, because motivation fades, but identity stays. So if you want to stop being average, you don't start with goals. You start with standards. You raise what you accept from yourself. You stop negotiating with laziness. You stop excusing weak habits. You stop pretending you'll change eventually. Because eventually is where dreams go to disappear. And this is where things get uncomfortable. Because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You realize that every excuse you made, every delay, every shortcut wasn't random. It was a pattern that kept you safe, but also kept you small. And breaking that pattern, that's where real change begins. But most people won't do it because it requires something they've been avoiding for a long time: discomfort. And in the next chapter, you're going to see why discomfort is not the enemy, but the only way out. Chapter 3. Discomfort is the price of escape. Most people don't hate being average. They hate the discomfort required to escape it. That's the truth. Because change is not complicated, it's uncomfortable. Waking up when you don't feel like it, uncomfortable. Saying no to distractions, uncomfortable. Working when nobody is watching, uncomfortable. Facing your own excuses, uncomfortable. And because of that, most people choose the easier option. Not because they're weak, but because they've trained themselves to avoid discomfort at all costs. But here's what no one tells you clearly enough. Every life is hard. You're just choosing which version of hard you can live with. Average is hard. Struggling financially, hard. Feeling stuck, hard. Watching others move ahead while you stay the same, hard. Regret is hard. And discipline, that's hard too. So the real question is not, do you want an easy life? Because that doesn't exist. The real question is, which hard are you willing to choose? Because right now, if you're stuck, you've already chosen. You've chosen the hard of staying the same. You've chosen the hard of repeating cycles. You've chosen the hard of postponing your potential, and it feels normal because you've been doing it for so long. But the moment you decide to change, everything shifts because now you're choosing a different kind of discomfort, the discomfort of growth, the discomfort of discipline, the discomfort of becoming someone new. And here's where most people fail. They try to feel ready first. They wait for motivation. They wait for clarity. They wait for the perfect moment. But that moment never comes because readiness is not a requirement. It's a result. You don't feel ready before you act. You feel ready after you've started. That's the shift. That's the difference between people who change and people who stay the same. One group waits, the other moves. Even when it's messy, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it doesn't feel perfect, because they understand something powerful. Discomfort is not a signal to stop. It's a signal that you're finally doing something that matters. Let that sink in, because your entire life changes when you stop running from discomfort and start using it. When you feel resistance, that's the direction. When you feel fear, that's the edge of growth. When you feel uncertain, that's the beginning of something new. But if you keep avoiding those feelings, you stay exactly where you are. This is why so many people stay stuck for years. Not because they don't want more, but because they're addicted to comfort. And comfort is the silent killer of potential. It doesn't hurt you loudly. It numbs you slowly until you forget what ambition even feels like, until you stop expecting more from yourself, until average feels acceptable. And that's when you lose, not when you fail, but when you stop trying to rise. So here's the shift you need to make. Stop asking, how do I avoid discomfort? Start asking, where is discomfort pointing me? Because that's where your next level lives, not in what's easy, but in what you've been avoiding. And once you understand that, you stop negotiating with yourself. You stop making excuses. You stop delaying action, because now you see clearly, and clarity removes hesitation. Dear viewers, write which city you're from. It's interesting to see which corners of the world are watching our videos. Chapter 4, the identity that keeps you broke. Let's go deeper, because this isn't just about habits. It's about who you believe you are. And that belief controls everything, your actions, your decisions, your standards, your results. Because you don't rise to your goals, you fall to your identity. If you see yourself as someone who procrastinates, you will procrastinate. If you see yourself as someone who struggles with money, you will keep struggling. If you see yourself as someone who tries but never follows through, that's exactly what you'll continue to do, not because you want to, but because your identity demands consistency. And most people have built an identity that keeps them stuck without realizing it. They say things like, I'm just not disciplined. I'm bad with money. I can't stay consistent. I always mess things up. And every time they say it, they reinforce it. They make it real. They turn it into a rule. And once it becomes a rule, your brain follows it, because your brain's job is not to make you successful. It's to keep you consistent with who you believe you are. That's why change feels unnatural, because you're trying to act differently without becoming different, and that never lasts. You might push for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, but eventually you fall back, because your identity pulls you back to what feels familiar. This is why people make progress and then lose it, start strong, and then disappear, not because they lack potential, but because they never changed who they believe they are. And until you do that, nothing sticks. So if you want to stop being average, you need to rebuild your identity from the ground up, not with words, with proof. Because identity is not built by what you say. It's built by what you repeatedly do. If you show up daily, you become someone who shows up. If you follow through, you become someone who finishes. If you handle your money wisely, you become someone who manages well. It's that simple. But it's not easy, because it requires consistency. And consistency is where most people fall apart. They want results fast. They want change instantly. They want transformation without repetition. But that's not how it works. Identity is built slowly, brick by brick, day by day, decision by decision. And most people quit before it solidifies. They go back to old patterns, old habits, old excuses, because that's what feels like them. So here's what you need to understand. If you don't consciously build your identity, your habits will build one for you. And most of the time, that identity keeps you stuck. So the question is, who are you becoming right now? Not who you want to be, not who you say you are, but who your actions prove you are. Because that's the version of you your future is built on. And if that version is average, your future will reflect it. But if you start shifting it, even slightly, everything begins to change. Not overnight, but inevitably. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand the invisible system that locks people into average lives without them even realizing it. Chapter 5. The invisible system that keeps you average. There is a system running your life right now. You didn't consciously build it. You didn't design it with intention. But it's there, quiet, repetitive, powerful, and it's shaping your results every single day. It's not your goals. It's not your dreams. It's your systems. The way you wake up, the way you spend your time, the way you respond to stress, the way you handle boredom, the way you deal with discomfort, that is your system. And here's the truth most people never face. You don't rise to your goals. You fall to your systems. So even if you want more, even if you dream bigger, even if you say this year will be different, if your system stays the same, your life stays the same. That's why people set goals every year and end up in the same place, because they chase outcomes, but ignore the structure that produces them. Let me show you how this plays out. You say you want to improve your life, but your mornings start with your phone, notifications, messages, noise, before you've even thought for yourself. The world is already thinking for you. Then your day fills up with distractions. Small ones, constant ones. Scrolling, checking, avoiding, delaying. And by the time the day ends, you feel busy, but you didn't move forward. That's a system designed unintentionally to keep you average, because it prioritizes comfort over growth, distraction over focus, ease over effort. And if you repeat that system daily, what do you think happens? You don't need bad luck to stay stuck. You just need a weak system. And most people have one, not because they're lazy, but because they have never stopped to build something better. They react instead of design. They drift instead of direct. They consume instead of create. And over time, that becomes their life. This is why two people with the same potential end up in completely different places. One builds systems that support growth, the other stays in systems that support comfort, and years later, the gap looks like talent. But it was structure all along. So if you want to stop being average, you need to stop focusing only on what you want and start focusing on how you live. What do your mornings look like? What do your evenings look like? What do you do when no one is watching? What do you default to when things get hard? Because those answers are your system, and your system is your future in motion. Here's the shift. Stop asking, what should I achieve? Start asking, what system produces the person I want to become? Because once you build the right system, results become inevitable, not instant, but inevitable. And most people will never do this because building systems is not exciting. It's repetitive, it's disciplined, it's consistent, it's quiet. And average people avoid quiet discipline. They chase loud motivation, but motivation fades, systems stay. And if you build the right ones, you don't have to rely on how you feel. You move anyway. That's power. That's control. That's how you escape average. But here's the catch. Even with the right system, there's something deeper that can still hold you back. Something most people never confront. And in the next chapter, you're going to face it directly. Because it's the real reason people stay broke, even when they try to change. If you have watched the video up to this point, please write in the comments which country you are from. It is very interesting to see which corners of the world our viewers come from. Chapter 6. Why your mind is working against you. You think your biggest problem is outside of you. Lack of money, lack of time, lack of opportunity. But the real problem is inside. It's the way you think. Because your mind is either your greatest weapon or your biggest limitation. And for most people, it's the second one, not because they're incapable, but because they've never trained it. They've let it run on default. And default thinking leads to default results. Let's be honest. How do you talk to yourself? When things get hard, do you push forward or do you hesitate? When you fail, do you learn or do you doubt yourself? When opportunity appears, do you act or do you overthink? Because those moments define everything, and most people lose in those moments. Not publicly, but internally. They hesitate, they delay, they talk themselves out of action, and that internal conversation becomes their reality. This is what separates people who grow from people who stay stuck. It's not knowledge, it's not resources, it's mental control. Because if your thoughts are weak, your actions will be inconsistent. If your thinking is scattered, your focus will collapse. If your mindset avoids responsibility, your life will reflect it. And here's the dangerous part. Most people don't even realize it. They think their problem is external, but the pattern is internal. They repeat the same thoughts, the same doubts, the same excuses, and expect a different outcome. But that never happens. Because your mind is the source. And if the source is weak, everything built on it will be unstable. That's why some people stay calm under pressure, while others panic. That's why some people stay focused, while others get distracted. That's why some people move forward consistently, while others start and stop. It's not luck. It's mental conditioning. And if you don't train your mind, it will default to comfort. It will avoid effort. It will protect you from discomfort, even when discomfort is exactly what you need. This is why so many people stay stuck. They're not fighting their circumstances, they're fighting themselves and losing because they've never taken control of their thinking. They let their emotions decide. They let their mood dictate action. They let their doubts override logic. And over time, that becomes their identity. This is exactly why people stay in cycles that don't make sense logically, as even highlighted in the competitor material. Because logic doesn't run their life, emotion does. And emotion, without control, leads to inconsistency. So here's the shift you need to make. Stop trusting every thought you have. Start questioning it. Start directing it. Start training it. Because your mind is not fixed, it's trainable. And once you take control of it, everything changes. Your focus sharpens. Your discipline strengthens. Your actions align. And your results follow. But this is where things get even more real. Because once you take control of your mind, you can no longer hide behind excuses. And in the next chapter, we're going to strip those excuses away completely, because that's where real transformation begins. Chapter 7. Excuses are the language of the stuck. There comes a moment in your life when you can no longer lie to yourself, not comfortably, not convincingly, because something inside you starts seeing through every excuse you make. And once that happens, you're at a crossroads. You either change or you consciously accept staying the same. There is no middle ground anymore, because excuses only work when you believe them, and most people do. They say things like, "I don't have time, I'm too tired, I'll start next week, I just need the right moment." But if you look closer, those are not reasons, they're shields. Shields that protect you from responsibility. Because responsibility is heavy. It forces you to admit something uncomfortable, that where you are right now is a result of your repeated choices, not just your circumstances, your choices. And that's where most people stop, because it's easier to blame, easier to point outward, easier to say life is unfair. But here's the reality. Blame might protect your ego, but it destroys your future. Because as long as the problem is outside of you, you have no control over fixing it. You stay stuck, waiting, hoping, complaining. But the moment you take responsibility, even for things that weren't entirely your fault, you gain power. Because now you can do something about it. And that's where transformation begins. Not in comfort, not in motivation, but in ownership. Total ownership of your time, your habits, your decisions, your standards, everything. This is what separates people who change their lives from people who talk about changing. One group owns everything. The other explains everything. And explanations don't create results. Action does. Let's break this down clearly. If you say, "I don't have time," what you really mean is it's not a priority. Because everyone has 24 hours, but not everyone uses them the same way. If you say, "I'm too tired," what you really mean is, "I've trained myself to stop when it's uncomfortable." Because there are people just as tired who still show up. If you say, "I'll start later," what you really mean is, "I'm avoiding the discomfort of starting now." And every time you delay, you strengthen that habit. This is the truth most people avoid. Excuses feel valid, but they're usually just disguised avoidance. And the longer you rely on them, the more they define you, until one day, you don't even question them anymore. They become automatic. And that's when you're fully stuck, not physically, but mentally. And mental stagnation is the hardest to escape because it feels normal, it feels justified, it feels real, but it's not truth, it's pattern. And patterns can be broken, but only when you see them clearly. So here's what I want you to do right now. Be honest, not with me, with yourself. What excuse have you been repeating the most? The one you go back to again and again? The one that sounds reasonable, but keeps you in the same place. Identify it. Don't soften it. Don't justify it. Just see it. Because once you see it clearly, it starts to lose power. And that's where change begins. Not when everything is perfect, but when you stop lying to yourself. Because the moment you remove excuses, there's only one thing left: action. And action is what creates a different life. Chapter 8, The Discipline Gap. There is a gap between where you are and where you want to be. Everyone has it, but not everyone crosses it, because that gap is not filled with ideas. It's not filled with motivation. It's filled with discipline. And discipline is where most people fall apart, not because they don't understand it, but because they don't respect it. They treat discipline like an option, something they do when they feel like it, something they rely on when motivation is high. But that's not discipline. That's convenience. Real discipline shows up when you don't feel like it, when you're tired, when you're distracted, when no one is watching. That's when it matters. Because anyone can act when they're motivated. That's easy, but can you act when you're not? That's the difference. That's the separator. That's the line between average and uncommon. Most people cross that line once, maybe twice, but they don't stay there. They fall back because they negotiate. They say, "I'll do it later. I deserve a break. I've done enough today." And slowly, they drift back into comfort, back into patterns, back into average. This is what the discipline gap looks like. It's not dramatic. It's subtle. It's the difference between doing what you planned and doing what you feel. And most people follow how they feel. That's why they stay stuck. Because feelings change, but results require consistency. And consistency requires discipline. There's a reason this keeps coming up. Because without discipline, nothing lasts. You can have the best plan, the best strategy, the best intentions, but without discipline, it falls apart every time. And this is where people get frustrated. They say, "I tried, I started, I was doing well," but then they stopped. Not because something external happened, but because discipline wasn't strong enough. And that's the truth most people avoid. They don't fail because they don't know what to do. They fail because they don't do it long enough. Because they stop when it gets hard. They stop when it gets boring. They stop when results aren't immediate. But that's exactly when discipline is needed the most. When progress is invisible, when effort feels unrewarded, when no one is clapping, that's where the real work happens. That's where identity is built. That's where you separate yourself. Because most people quit there. They go back to what's easy, what's familiar, what's comfortable. And that's why they stay average. So here's the shift. Stop asking yourself, "How do I stay motivated?" Start asking, "How do I stay consistent?" Because motivation is temporary, discipline is permanent. And if you can build discipline, you don't need motivation. You don't need perfect conditions. You don't need to feel ready. You just move. Daily, quietly, relentlessly, and over time, that becomes who you are. Not someone who tries, but someone who executes. And once you reach that point, your life changes. Not because you got lucky, but because you became reliable. Reliable to yourself, reliable to your goals, reliable in your actions. And that reliability is what creates results. But here's where it gets even deeper, because even with discipline, there's something that can still slow you down, something subtle, something most people don't notice. And in the next chapter, you're going to uncover it, because it's one of the biggest traps keeping people average in 2025. Chapter 9, The Distraction Economy. Right now, your attention is under attack. Not metaphorically, literally. Every app you open, every notification you hear, every scroll you make is designed to keep you there, because your attention is currency. And in 2025, the most valuable resource is not money. It's focus. But here's the problem. Most people have completely lost control of it. They don't decide what they focus on. Their environment decides for them. They wake up and immediately reach for their phone, messages, social media, updates. Before they've even had a single original thought, their mind is already filled with noise. And from that moment forward, their day is reactive, not intentional. They respond instead of create. They consume instead of build. They drift instead of direct. And over time, that becomes their default state. Constant distraction, constant stimulation, constant avoidance of anything that requires deep focus. This is the modern trap, because it doesn't feel like failure. It feels like activity. You're always doing something, scrolling, watching, checking, replying, but none of it moves your life forward. And the worst part, it feels normal, because everyone around you is doing the same thing. So you don't question it. You accept it. You adapt to it. And slowly, your ability to focus weakens. Your patience shrinks. Your discipline erodes, until eventually, you can't sit still long enough to do anything meaningful. That's the cost, not immediate failure, but long-term stagnation. Because success requires focus, deep, uninterrupted focus, and that's exactly what most people no longer have. They try to work, but check their phone every few minutes. They try to learn, but get distracted halfway through. They try to improve, but can't stay consistent. Not because they don't want to, but because their attention is fragmented. And fragmented attention creates fragmented results. This is one of the biggest reasons people stay average today. Not lack of opportunity, but lack of focus. Because without focus, you can't build anything. Not skills, not discipline, not momentum, nothing. And if you can't focus, you stay stuck, no matter how much you want to change. So here's the uncomfortable truth. If you don't control your attention, someone else will, and they will use it to keep you watching, scrolling, consuming, while your own life stays the same. This is not an accident. It's a system designed to keep you engaged, not evolving, and the longer you stay in it, the harder it becomes to break free. Because your brain adapts. It craves stimulation. It avoids boredom. It resists anything that feels slow or difficult, which means it resists growth. Because growth requires focus. It requires patience. It requires sitting with discomfort. And if your mind is constantly distracted, you lose that ability. So what happens? You stay average, not because you chose it directly, but but because your environment trained you into it. This is why discipline today is not just about working hard. It's about protecting your attention, guarding your focus, choosing what deserves your energy. Because every time you give your attention to something, you're investing in it. And most people are investing in distractions instead of themselves. So here's the shift. Start treating your attention like it matters. Because it does. Limit what drains it. Remove what distracts it. Focus on what builds you, even if it feels uncomfortable, even if it feels boring at first. Because that's where real progress begins, not in constant stimulation, but in controlled focus. And once you regain that control, you unlock something powerful, momentum. But before you can build momentum, there's one more trap you need to understand, one that looks harmless, but keeps millions of people stuck. And in the next chapter, you're going to see it clearly, because it's disguised as something positive, but it's actually holding you back. Chapter 10, The Illusion of Trying. There's a word that sounds good, but destroys progress. Trying. I'm trying to get better. I'm trying to stay consistent. I'm trying to change. It sounds responsible. It sounds like effort. It sounds like movement. But most of the time, it's an illusion. Because trying doesn't guarantee action. It doesn't guarantee consistency. It doesn't guarantee results. It creates space for failure. Because when you try, you give yourself an escape, a way out, a justification. If it doesn't work, you can say, well, I tried. And that feels acceptable. That feels complete. That feels like effort was enough. But here's the truth. Trying is not the same as doing. And your life doesn't change from trying. It changes from executing, from committing, from following through. Even when it's inconvenient, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you don't feel like it. That's the difference. And most people stay stuck in the cycle of trying because it protects them from accountability. If you fully commit, there's no excuse. If you fully act, there's no hiding. If you fully show up, there's no room for maybe. It's either done or it's not. And that level of clarity scares people because now they can't lie to themselves. They can't pretend progress. They can't hide behind effort. It becomes real, and real requires responsibility. So they stay in trying. They stay in partial effort, partial focus, partial commitment, and that leads to partial results, which feels like failure. So they stop, or they restart, or they keep trying. And the cycle continues. This is one of the most dangerous traps because it feels productive, but it's not. It's motion without direction, effort without outcome. And if you stay there long enough, you convince yourself that you're doing everything you can, when in reality, you're holding back, not fully committing, not fully executing, not fully showing up. And that's why nothing changes. So here's the shift. Remove the word try. Replace it with do, not perfectly, but consistently, not emotionally, but intentionally, because once you make that shift, everything becomes clearer. You either did it or you didn't. You either followed through or you didn't. You either showed up or you didn't. No gray area, no excuses, no illusions. And that clarity is what creates progress. Because now you can measure reality, you can adjust, you can improve. But when you stay in trying, you stay in uncertainty. And uncertainty keeps you stuck. So from this point forward, stop asking yourself, am I trying? Start asking, did I execute? Because that answer will tell you everything you need to know. And once you start executing consistently, something powerful begins to build. Confidence. Not fake confidence, not temporary motivation, but real, grounded confidence. The kind that comes from proof. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand how to build that kind of confidence from the ground up, because without it, you will always hesitate, and hesitation is where average lives. Chapter 11. Confidence is built, not found. Most people are waiting to feel confident before they act. That's why they hesitate. That's why they delay. That's why they stay stuck, because they believe confidence comes first and action comes after. But it's the opposite. Confidence is not something you discover. It's something you build, and it's built through proof. Not words, not thoughts, not motivation. Proof. Small wins. Repeated consistently. That's where real confidence comes from. But most people skip that part. They want to feel ready before they begin. They want certainty before they commit. They want guarantees before they move. And because of that, they never start. Or they start and stop quickly. Because without proof, their confidence collapses. It's unstable. It's dependent on how they feel. And feelings change, so their progress changes up one day, down the next. Consistent, never. That's the problem, because real confidence is not emotional. It's evidence-based. It comes from knowing, I've done this before, I can do this again. I trust myself to follow through, and that kind of confidence only comes from action, from repetition, from showing up, even when you don't feel like it. Let me make this clear. You don't become confident by thinking about it. You become confident by doing things you once avoided. That's it. That's the formula. Simple, but uncomfortable, because it requires you to face the very things you've been avoiding. The things that make you doubt yourself. The things that make you hesitate. The things that expose your weaknesses. That's where confidence is built, not in comfort, but in confrontation with yourself. And most people avoid that confrontation. They stay in their comfort zone. They stay in what they know. They stay in what feels safe. And because of that, their confidence never grows. It stays small, fragile, dependent, and that affects everything, their decisions, their opportunities, their actions. Because if you don't trust yourself, you hesitate, you second guess, you overthink, and hesitation kills progress. Opportunities pass, moments fade, time moves, and you stay where you are. So here's what you need to understand. Confidence is not required to start. It's built after you start. So stop waiting for it. Start building it. How? By keeping promises to yourself. That's the foundation. If you say you'll do something, do it. Even if it's small. Especially if it's small. Because every time you follow through, you build trust with yourself. And self-trust is the root of confidence. Without it, nothing sticks. You doubt everything. You question everything. You hesitate constantly. But with it, you move differently. You act faster. You think clearer. You commit stronger. Because you know you can rely on yourself. And that changes everything. But here's where most people fail. They only keep promises when it's easy, when they feel good, when they're motivated. But that doesn't build confidence. That builds dependency on emotion. Real confidence is built when you follow through, even when you don't feel like it. When you're tired, when you're distracted, when you'd rather do anything else. That's when it counts. That's when identity shifts. That's when you prove to yourself, I'm not controlled by how I feel. I do what needs to be done. And once you reach that level, you're no longer average, because average people act based on emotion. Disciplined people act based on decision. That's the difference, and it shows in their results, in their mindset, in their life. So here's your challenge. Start small, but stay consistent. Pick one thing, just one, and do it daily. No excuses, no negotiation, no delay, because that one action, repeated consistently, will begin to reshape how you see yourself. And once your self-image changes, your behavior follows. And once your behavior changes, your results follow. That's the chain. That's how transformation happens. Not instantly, but inevitably. But there's something else, something deeper, that can still slow you down. Even when you're building discipline, even when you're taking action, even when you're trying to improve. And it's something most people never question, because it feels normal, but it's not. And in the next chapter, you're going to see it clearly, because it's one of the biggest hidden reasons people never break out of average. Dear viewer, we strive to create high-quality videos for you. Please assist us in improving our efforts by commenting on what you like about the video and what you would change or add. We would be very grateful. Chapter 12. The environment that shapes you. You think you're in control of your life, and to a degree, you are. But there's something influencing you every single day. Something subtle, something powerful, something most people underestimate. Your environment, the people you're around, the content you consume, the conversations you listen to, the spaces you spend time in, all of it is shaping you constantly. Because whether you realize it or not, you are always adapting, always absorbing, always becoming a reflection of what surrounds you, and that's dangerous if your environment is average. Because average environments create average people, not intentionally, but inevitably. Let's break it down. If you spend most of your time around people who complain, you will start to complain. If you surround yourself with people who avoid responsibility, you will start to avoid it. If your daily input is filled with distractions, your mind will become distracted. Not because you chose it consciously, but because repetition builds identity, and environment controls repetition. That's the link. That's the influence, and most people never question it. They stay in the same circles, the same habits, the same conversations, and wonder why nothing changes. But how can it, when everything around you reinforces who you already are? Growth requires friction. It requires new input, new perspectives, new standards. But if your environment stays the same, you stay the same. This is why some people transform rapidly when they change their environment. Not because they suddenly became different, but because their surroundings force them to level up. Higher standards, higher expectations, higher awareness, and over time, they adapt, they grow, they evolve. But most people never make that shift. They stay where it's comfortable, where they're understood, where they don't have to change, and comfort keeps them average. So here's the uncomfortable question. Is your environment helping you grow or keeping you the same? Because you can't build an exceptional life in an environment that rewards average behavior. It doesn't work. You'll feel resistance, you'll feel friction, you'll feel like you're going against the current, and eventually you'll either break through or fall back. And most people fall back because environment is powerful. It shapes your thinking, your habits, your expectations, your identity, and if you don't take control of it, It takes control of you. So what do? You become intentional about what you allow into your life. You limit exposure to negativity, to distraction, to people who reinforce weakness, not out of arrogance, but out of awareness. Because you're protecting your growth. You're protecting your focus. You're protecting your future. And at the same time, you seek better input, stronger conversations, higher standards, people who challenge you, content that builds you, spaces that push you forward. Because growth is not just about what you do. It's about what surrounds you. And once you change your environment, you change your trajectory, not instantly, but inevitably. But here's the deeper layer, because even if you change your environment, even if you improve your habits, even if you build discipline, there's still one thing that can quietly pull you back. Something internal, something emotional, something most people never fully master. And in the next chapter, you're going to confront it. Because it's the reason people self-sabotage. Right when they're about to grow. Chapter 13, The Self-Sabotage Pattern. There is a moment right before your life starts to change, right before things begin to click, right before momentum builds. And in that moment, most people pull back, not forward, back. They slow down, they hesitate, they distract themselves, they break their own rhythm, and from the outside, it looks confusing. Why would someone stop when they're finally making progress? But from the inside, it makes perfect sense. Because growth triggers fear. Not always loud fear, not always obvious fear, but subtle, quiet, internal resistance. Because becoming someone new means letting go of who you've been, and that's uncomfortable. Even if who you've been is average, even if who you've been is stuck, even if who you've been is not where you want to be, it's still familiar. And the mind prefers familiar pain over unfamiliar growth. That's the trap. So when you start improving, waking up earlier, working harder, staying consistent, there's a part of you that resists, that whispers things like, "This is too much, you're doing too much, slow down, you deserve a break." And it sounds reasonable, it sounds logical, but it's not truth, it's protection. Your mind trying to pull you back to what it knows, to what it recognizes, to what feels safe. And if you don't understand this, you will fall into the pattern. You'll start strong, then disappear. You'll build momentum, then break it. You'll get close, then sabotage yourself. Not because you want to fail, but because you haven't learned how to handle growth. This is why so many people stay stuck. They don't just lack discipline. They lack awareness of their own patterns. They don't realize they are the ones interrupting their own progress. And once that becomes a habit, it repeats over and over. Start, stop, restart, stop again. And every time, it becomes harder to trust yourself, harder to believe you'll follow through, harder to build consistency. Because now, you've built a new identity. Someone who starts, but doesn't finish. That's the real damage of self-sabotage. It doesn't just stop progress, it rewrites how you see yourself. And once that identity forms, it reinforces itself. You expect to quit. You expect inconsistency. You expect failure. And your actions follow. So how do you break it? First, you recognize it. You become aware of the pattern, not after it happens, but while it's happening. When you feel the urge to slow down, to skip, to delay, to take a break when you just started gaining momentum, pause and ask yourself, is this rest or is this resistance? Because there's a difference. Rest is intentional, it's planned, it supports progress. Resistance is reactive. It appears when things get uncomfortable, when growth begins, when identity starts to shift. And if you confuse the two, you'll sabotage yourself without realizing it. Second, you stay consistent through discomfort. Not extreme effort, not burnout, but consistency. Because the goal is not to push harder, it's to stay steady, to not break the pattern, to not fall back into old habits. Because once momentum builds, everything becomes easier. But only if you protect it, and most people don't. They let one missed day turn into three into a week into starting over. Again, that's the cycle, that's the trap. And breaking it requires awareness, discipline, and honesty. You have to catch yourself before you fall. You have to recognize the moment where you usually quit and choose differently, even if it's small, even if it's not perfect. Just don't stop. Because stopping is what resets everything. And if you can learn to push through that moment, that exact moment where you used to quit, you change everything. You break the pattern. You build trust. You strengthen identity. And that's when real growth begins. But here's the deeper truth. Self-sabotage doesn't just come from fear. It also comes from something else, something quieter, something more accepted, something that looks harmless, but keeps you stuck just as effectively. And in the next chapter, you're going to see it clearly because it's one of the most normalized behaviors that keeps people average. Chapter 14, The Comfort of Later. There is a word that has destroyed more potential than failure ever could. Later. I'll start later. I'll fix it later. I'll focus later. I'll become better. Later. It sounds harmless. It sounds responsible. It sounds like you're planning. But you're not. You're postponing. And postponing is one of the most dangerous habits you can build because it feels productive without requiring action. It gives you the illusion of control without forcing you to change. And over time, it becomes your default response to everything that matters. You don't say no, you say later. You don't reject growth, you delay it. And that delay is where average lives. Because every time you say later, you reinforce a pattern of avoidance, a pattern of hesitation, a pattern of pushing responsibility into the future. And the future never arrives the way you expect it to. Because when later becomes a habit, it turns into never. Not instantly, but gradually, quietly, without resistance, without urgency, just delay after delay, until time passes and nothing changes. This is how people lose years, not by making huge mistakes, but by postponing small actions every day. Think about it. How many times have you said, I'll start next week, I'll get serious next month, I'll change when things calm down, but things don't calm down. Life doesn't slow down. Conditions are never perfect, and waiting for the right moment is the perfect excuse to never begin, because the right moment doesn't exist. It's created by action, not by waiting. But most people wait, because starting now feels uncomfortable. It requires effort, it requires focus, it requires stepping out of what's easy. So they choose later, and later feels better in the moment, but worse over time, because every delay costs you momentum. Every delay weakens your discipline. Every delay reinforces the identity of someone who doesn't follow through. And identity is everything. You don't just delay actions. You delay who you could become. And that's the real cost. Not the missed task, but the missed transformation. Because every time you act, you build. And every time you delay, you stay the same. So here's the shift. Stop negotiating with time. Stop giving yourself later as an option. Because later is not neutral, it's destructive. Instead, replace it with one word, now. Not perfectly, not massively, but immediately, small action, right away. Because action creates momentum, and momentum breaks resistance. You don't need a perfect plan. You don't need full clarity. You don't need to feel ready. You just need to move. And once you move, everything becomes easier. Not instantly, but progressively. Because now you're in motion. And motion is what creates change. So the next time you catch yourself saying later, pause and ask, why not now? And be honest. Because most of the time, there's no real reason, just resistance. And if you act in that moment, even slightly, you begin to break the pattern, you begin to shift identity, you begin to take control. And that's where transformation starts. Not in big decisions, but in small moments, where you choose action instead of delay. But here's where it gets even more real. Because even if you stop delaying, even if you take action, there's still something that can limit you, something that shapes your results without you noticing. And in the next chapter, you're going to uncover it because it's deeply tied to how you see money, success, and your own value. And if you don't change it, you will stay stuck, no matter how hard you try. Chapter 15, The Money Identity. You never questioned. Let's talk about something most people avoid, not because it's complicated, but because it's uncomfortable. Money, not just how you earn it, but how you think about it, because your financial reality is not just a result of your income, it's a reflection of your identity. The way you see money, the way you handle it, the way you value it, the way you expect it to show up in your life. All of that creates your financial ceiling. And most people have built a ceiling they don't even realize exists. They say things like, I'm just not good with money. I'll figure it out later. I just need to make more. But making more doesn't fix a broken mindset. It exposes it. Because if your habits stay the same, more money just amplifies the problem. That's why people earn more and still feel stuck, still live paycheck to paycheck, still feel pressure because nothing changed internally. And this is something that was hinted at even in the competitor material. People don't get into financial problems because of lack of intelligence. They get there because they ignore reality and avoid discipline. They don't do the math. They don't face the truth. They don't take control. And that pattern repeats over and over. But let's go deeper. Because this isn't just about spending or saving. It's about identity. If you see yourself as someone who struggles financially, you will act accordingly. You will avoid looking at numbers. You will delay decisions. You will make emotional choices. And those actions reinforce the identity. It becomes a loop. And breaking that loop requires awareness. You have to ask yourself, what do I actually believe about money? Do you see it as something scarce, something stressful, something complicated? Or do you see it as a tool, something you can learn, something you can control? Because your belief shapes your behavior, and your behavior creates your results. This is why two people can earn the same amount and live completely different lives. One builds, one consumes, one plans, one reacts, one grows, one stays stuck. Same income, different identity, and identity is what matters. So if you want to stop being average, you need to upgrade how you think about money, not emotionally. Logically, you need to face reality, look at your numbers, understand your habits, take responsibility, because avoidance keeps you blind, and blindness keeps you stuck. This is not about being perfect. It's about being aware, because once you become aware, you can change, you can adjust, you can improve. But if you keep avoiding, nothing shifts. And this applies to more than just money. It applies to every area of your life, because the pattern is the same. Avoid reality, stay stuck, face reality, gain control, and control is what creates freedom, not comfort, not luck, not shortcuts. Control. So here's the shift. Stop hoping things will improve. Start understanding why they haven't. Because once you understand the pattern, you can break it. And once you break it, you build something new. But here's where it gets even more real, because understanding is not enough. Awareness is not enough. Even discipline is not enough if you don't apply it consistently over time. And that's where most people fail. They start strong. They get clarity. They feel motivated, but they don't sustain it. And in the next chapter, you're going to understand why consistency breaks and how to build something that actually lasts. Because without that, you will always restart. And restarting is the hidden cycle of average. Chapter 16, Why You Keep Restarting. There is a cycle that traps millions of people. It looks like progress, it feels like effort, but it leads nowhere. It's the cycle of restarting. You've felt it before. You decide to change. You feel motivated. You take action for a few days, maybe weeks. You're consistent, focused, disciplined, and then something breaks. You miss one day, then another, then you tell yourself, I'll get back on track tomorrow. But tomorrow turns into next week. Next week turns into starting over again. And when you restart, it feels like a fresh beginning, like a second chance, like this time will be different. But the pattern repeats. Start, stop, restart, stop again. And over time, that cycle becomes your identity. Not someone who builds, but someone who begins and never sustains. And that's the real problem. Not that you're not capable, but that you don't stay consistent long enough for anything to compound. Because success is not built in starts. It's built in continuity, in repetition, in staying with something long after the excitement fades. And that's where most people fall off, because they rely on motivation. And motivation is temporary. It gives you a push, a spark, a burst of energy, but it doesn't last. And when it fades, if you don't have structure, you fall. That's the missing piece. Structure. Most people try to rely on willpower, on feeling, on intensity, but those are unstable. They change. They fluctuate. They disappear. And when they do, so does your consistency. That's why you restart. Not because you failed, but because you didn't build something that could carry you when motivation disappeared. So here's the shift you need to make. Stop relying on how you feel. Start relying on what you've built. Systems, routines, standards, because those don't depend on emotion. They operate regardless of it. And that's what creates stability. That's what creates consistency. That's what breaks the cycle. Let's get practical. Why do you usually stop? Is it because you get tired, distracted, bored, overwhelmed? Whatever the reason, that's your breaking point. That's where your system needs to be strongest. Not at the beginning, but at the point where you usually quit, because that's where the pattern resets. And if you can strengthen that moment, you stop restarting. You start continuing, even imperfectly, even slowly, even with resistance. You just don't stop. And that changes everything. Because now, you're no longer starting from zero. You're building layer by layer, day by day. And that's where real progress happens. Not in intensity, but in consistency. Let me say that again. Your life does not change when you start. It changes when you don't stop. That's the difference. That's the shift. That's what most people never master. They love beginnings, but they don't respect maintenance. And maintenance is where growth actually happens. It's not exciting. It's not dramatic. It's not emotional. It's quiet, repetitive, sometimes boring. But it works every time if you stick with it. So here's what you need to do. Lower the intensity. Raise the consistency. Stop trying to do everything. Start doing something daily. And protect that no matter what. Because once you build that rhythm, that baseline, that standard, you stop restarting. You start evolving. And evolution is what creates a different life. But here's where things get even deeper. Because even if you stay consistent, even if you build systems, even if you stop restarting, there's still one thing. That determines how far you go. Something internal, something foundational, something most people ignore. Until it's too late. And in the next chapter, you're going to confront it directly because it defines your ceiling in every area of your life. Chapter 17, Your Standards Define Your Life. There is something quietly controlling everything you tolerate, everything you accept, everything you repeat. And most people never stop to define it. Your standards, not your goals, not your intentions, your standards. Because goals are what you want. Standards are what you live with. And your life is always a reflection of your standards. Not what you say you want, but what you allow, what you tolerate, what you excuse. That is your real level. Let's make this clear. You can say you want success, but if you tolerate distraction, you'll stay distracted. You can say you want discipline, but if you tolerate inconsistency, you'll stay inconsistent. You can say you want more money, but if you tolerate poor habits, you'll stay in the same position because your standards override your goals. Every time. That's the truth most people avoid. They think wanting more is enough, but it's not. Because wanting doesn't change behavior. Standards do. Standards define what is acceptable, what is non-negotiable, what you will and will not allow in your life. And most people have low standards for themselves, not intentionally, but through repetition. They've normalized wasting time, breaking promises, delaying action, making excuses, and over time, that becomes their baseline, their normal, their identity. So even when they try to change, they fall back because their standards haven't changed. Only their intentions have. And intentions don't hold under pressure. Standards do. This is why some people move differently. They don't rely on how they feel. They rely on what they've decided is acceptable. They don't negotiate with themselves. They don't justify weak behavior. They don't tolerate inconsistency because their standard is higher. And that changes everything, not just their actions, but their identity. Because once you raise your standards, your behavior must follow. Or you feel the difference immediately. You feel the gap. And that discomfort pushes you to align. That's power. That's control. That's how change becomes permanent. Not through motivation, but through standards. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. What have I been tolerating that's keeping me average? Be honest. Because the answer is there. In your habits, in your routine, in your decisions, in your patterns. And once you see it, you have a choice. You either continue to tolerate it or you raise your standard. And raising your standard is not about saying it once. It's about enforcing it daily through action, through consistency, through discipline, because a standard without action is just a preference. And preferences don't change your life. Standards do. So if you want to stop being average, you need to stop accepting average behavior from yourself. No more excuses, no more delays, no more negotiation, because every time you tolerate less than your potential, you reinforce it. And every time you raise the bar, you grow into it. That's the shift. That's the difference. That's how you move forward. But here's where it gets even more real. Because once you raise your standards, you start to see things differently. You start to notice gaps. You start to feel urgency. You start to realize time is not unlimited. And in the next chapter, you're going to confront something most people avoid thinking about until it's too late, because it changes how you see every decision you make. And once you understand it, you will never look at your time the same way again. Dear viewer, please write in the comments how you like the video. Do you like it? Or is there anything you would improve? Please let us know so that we can make good, high-quality videos for you. Thank you very much. Chapter 18. Time is not waiting for you. There is one truth that most people avoid thinking about. Not because they don't understand it, but because they don't feel it. Time is limited, not in theory, not someday, right now. Every day you wake up, you have less time than you did yesterday. And that's not meant to scare you. It's meant to wake you up. Because the way most people live ignores this completely. They act like there's always more time, more chances, more opportunities, more later, but there isn't. There is only now, repeated daily, and what you do with that defines everything. Let's be honest. How many days have you wasted? Not intentionally, but passively, scrolling, delaying, avoiding, repeating the same routine without moving forward. Days that felt busy, but changed nothing. Now multiply that by weeks, by months, by years. That's how people wake up one day and realize nothing has changed, not because they didn't have time, but because they didn't use it. And the hardest part? You don't feel it while it's happening. There's no alarm, no warning, just slow, quiet loss, until it becomes visible, until you look back and see the gap between where you are and where you could have been. That's when it hits. But by then, time is already gone. This is why urgency matters, not panic, not stress, but awareness. The understanding that every day counts, every decision matters, every action compounds, because it does, whether you notice it or not. If you use your time well, it builds. If you waste it, it disappears. And most people let it disappear, not because they want to, but because they don't respect it. They treat it like it's renewable, like they can always start tomorrow. But tomorrow is just another version of today. If nothing changes, that's the reality. So if you want to stop being average, you need to change how you see time, not as something you spend, but as something you invest. Because every hour you use is building something, either your future or your stagnation. There is no neutral. You're always moving, forward or staying the same, and staying the same over time becomes falling behind. That's the part people don't realize. You don't have to go backwards to lose progress. You just have to stay still while everything else moves, and in 2025, Everything is moving fast. Technology, opportunities, competition, standards. And if you're not evolving, you're being left behind, not dramatically, but gradually, quietly, until the gap becomes too large and catching up feels impossible. That's why now matters. Not next week, not next month, now. Because the sooner you act, the more time works for you. The longer you delay, the more it works against you. That's the trade. That's the reality. And once you see it clearly, you stop wasting it. You stop delaying. You stop treating your days like they don't matter. Because they do. Every single one. So here's the shift. Stop asking, do I have time? Start asking, how am I using the time I already have? Because that answer explains your life. And if you don't like the answer, you don't need more time. You need better decisions, better focus, better standards, because time doesn't change your life. What you do with it does. But here's where it gets even deeper, because once you understand time, once you raise your standards, once you build discipline, there's still one final barrier that holds most people back. And it's not external, it's internal. It's the fear of becoming something different, and in the next chapter, you're going to face it directly. Because this fear is what keeps people playing small, even when they know they're capable of more. Chapter 19, The Fear of Becoming More. There is a fear that almost nobody talks about. Not the fear of failure, not the fear of losing, but something deeper. The fear of becoming more, because becoming more changes everything. It changes how you think, how you act, how you spend your time, who you spend it with, and most importantly, it changes who you are. And that is uncomfortable. Even if your current life isn't where you want it to be, it's familiar, it's predictable, it's known. But growth? Growth is unknown. It introduces uncertainty, new expectations, new responsibilities, new pressure, and your mind naturally resists that. Not because it wants you to fail, but because it wants you to stay safe. That's its job, to protect you, to keep you in what it understands. So when you start to change, when you start to think differently, act differently, move differently, there's a part of you that hesitates, that pulls back, that questions everything. Who do you think you are? What if you fail? What if people judge you? What if you can't maintain it? And those thoughts feel real. They feel logical, but they're not truth. They're fear. And if you listen to them, you shrink. You slow down. You return to what's comfortable. And that's how people stay average, not because they can't grow, but because they're afraid of what growth requires. Because becoming more means letting go of who you've been, and that's the hardest part. You have to release the identity that kept you safe, to step into one that demands more from you, more discipline, more focus, more responsibility. And most people avoid that. They say they want success. They say they want change. But they're not ready for the version of themselves that comes with it, because that version requires consistency, requires standards, requires sacrifice. And that's where the resistance appears. So they stay where they are, not fully satisfied, but comfortable enough to avoid change. And that's the trap. Because comfort becomes a cage, not a prison you're forced into, but one you stay in voluntarily. Because leaving it feels harder than staying, even if staying costs you your potential. So here's the truth you need to face. You cannot become more while holding on to who you used to be. It doesn't work. You can't think like your old self and expect a different life. You can't act like your old self and expect new results. You can't stay in the same patterns and expect transformation. Something has to change, and that something is you, not your environment, not your circumstances. You, your thinking, your actions, your standards, your identity. And that shift is uncomfortable because it's unfamiliar, because it challenges everything you've been used to, because it forces you to grow. But that discomfort is necessary, because on the other side of it is expansion, is progress, is a version of you that you've been capable of all along. So here's the shift. Stop fearing the person you're becoming. Start fearing staying the same, because staying the same costs more over time. In missed opportunities, in lost potential, in regret, and regret is far heavier than discomfort. So if you feel resistance, if you feel fear, if you feel uncertain, good. That means you're stepping into something new. That means you're growing. That means you're leaving average behind. But only if you keep moving, because fear only controls you if you stop. And most people stop right at the edge, right before the breakthrough, right when things are about to change. And that's why they stay stuck. But you don't have to. Not anymore. Because now you see it. Now you understand it. Now you can move through it. And once you do, there's only one thing left. One final shift. One final decision. That determines whether you stay where you are or become who you're capable of being. And in the next chapter, everything comes together. Because this is where you stop listening and start becoming. Thank you for listening to the audiobook. Leave a comment telling us what you liked most about the video. Have a great day.